The pickup truck sped off, kicking a cloud of hot desert dust into 6-year-old Ethan's face. He didn't cry. He just stood there, small, silent, forgotten on the edge of the Sonoran Desert, clutching a worn blue dinosaur keychain. His stepfather, Robert, never looked back. The sun was merciless, the silence louder than any goodbye. 20 miles away, Thor stirred. The aging German shepherd lifted his head from the floor as Sarah stepped out for her night shift. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Moments later, the screen door exploded off its hinges as Thor burst into the night. His boy needed him. Pause. Scraped pavement, nose to the wind. Every sense on fire. The suburban streets gave way to dust-choked roads. Thor ignored it all, the barking dogs, passing cars, heat pressing down like a fist. The only thing that mattered was the scent he couldn't let go of. Ethan's. Faint but familiar. Strawberry shampoo, hospital antiseptic. Something uniquely Ethan burned into Thor's soul. The desert loomed ahead. Heat shimmered like ghosts on the horizon. Thor ran harder. 5 years earlier, he'd lain beside Ethan's crib while Michael, the boy's real father, strummed soft lullabies on a battered guitar. "You're his guardian now," Michael had whispered, scratching Thor behind the ears. No matter what happens. 3 months later, Michael was dead. A car wreck on a straight road in clear daylight. Sarah became a widow. Thor became everything else. He'd been there when Ethan collapsed. In the backyard. First the fever, then the rash. Strange red blotches on his arms. No diagnosis, no cure, just tests and whispered hospital terms. Every flare-up, Thor was there, pressed against Ethan's trembling frame, alerting Sarah even before her son could. Cry out. Then came Robert. At first, he brought stability. He smiled. He played catch. But Thor noticed the change, the tension in his shoulders, the scent of sweat and fear when medical bills piled up. And the whispers at night. "We can't afford this, Sarah. He's a child. He's not mine." This morning, Robert said he was taking Ethan for a drive. Just the two of them. When Thor tried to follow, Robert shoved him back. "Not this time, dog." Now Thor ran like he never had before, across scorching earth, bleeding paws pounding. Sand and stone. The moon rose over the jagged silhouettes of the Superstition Mountains. Somewhere ahead, the boy he swore to protect was waiting or dying. Not far from where Thor was running, 63-year-old William Harris sat stranded beside his stalled Range Rover. His skin burned. His joints screamed. The red blotches on. His arms had returned, angry and spreading. His water bottle was nearly empty. The satellite phone was dead. The sun dipped lower, shadows growing long and sharp. He should have gone to Sarah directly. Instead, he'd followed Robert's pickup down unmarked roads, chasing a gut instinct too late to stop whatever was happening. William wasn't just another old man. He was a pharmaceutical tycoon, rich, powerful, sick, and for 30 years, he'd carried a mystery inside his blood one no doctor could solve. But a small-town physician named Michael Parker had once reached out to him with a theory. "It's not natural," Michael had written. "It's environmental, military, past, through generations. My son is showing symptoms. We need to meet." They never did. 2 days before their meeting, Michael died. Same road, same silence, same suspicion. So William began digging, quietly, discreetly. His condition, Michael's death. And now Ethan. 6 months ago, he found Sarah and Ethan living in Phoenix. He stayed in the shadows, confirming from a distance that the child was symptomatic, planning how to approach, hoping for a chance. Then yesterday, Robert met with 2 men in suits. Today he drove Ethan into the desert. Now William was stranded, sick and running out of time, the weight of his guilt heavier than the heat. He stumbled from the vehicle, flares in hand, knees buckling beneath him. He had one last chance to signal help if he could survive until nightfall. Under a pale moon, Thor climbed a rocky ridge. His chest heaved, his paws burned. But the scent was strong now, close. And then there he was, Ethan, curled beneath a creosote bush, skin flushed, lips cracked, barely breathing. Thor rushed to him, nudging the boy's face, whining softly. Ethan stirred, fingers reaching weakly toward the dinosaur keychain. Thor. He whispered. The dog pressed his body against the child's side, offering warmth, protection, presence. He let out a long, mournful howl, his voice echoing into the stars. A flare lit the sky moments later, red light. A flare from the mountains. William dropped the flare gun. Through the shimmer of heat and tears, he saw them. A child and a dog, still alive, together in a nauseating whirl. Not now, he muttered through gritted teeth. Not when I'm so close. In his pocket, his fingers closed around a small photograph he always carried, the only picture he had of Michael Parker, taken from the man's obituary. Next to it was a school photo of Ethan obtained through his investigator. The resemblance between father and son was striking, but what had caught William's attention were the faint red patches visible on Ethan's neck in the school photo, identical to the ones William had battled his entire adult life. As consciousness began to slip away, William thought he heard something, a sound out of place in the desert silence. A barking dog? Impossible. Fahid was causing hallucinations now. He slumped against the wheel of the Range Rover, the metal still hot against his back despite the setting sun. His last coherent thought before darkness claimed him was a silent apology to Michael Parker. "I'm sorry I failed, Yorson." Hours passed in a haze of fever dreams. William drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes believing he was back in his Boston office, sometimes thinking he was a young man again before the condition had taken hold of his life. The desert cold seeped into his bones, making the inflammation even more painful. In one moment of clarity, William realized he had failed to spread thermal blanket. He was shivering violently, his body temperature dropping dangerously. He tried to move but found his limbs unresponsive, locked in the grip of his condition and hypothermia. This was how it would end then. Not surrounded by family, he had none, or in the comfort of his mansion, but alone in the desert, chasing ghosts and conspiracies that no one else believed in. A sound penetrated his fog, note imagined this time. A rhythmic panting, the scrape of paws on gravel. William forced his eyes open, blinking against the moonlight now bathing the desert in silver. A large dog stood 20 feet away, its alert ears silhouetted against the star-filled sky. A German Shepherd, William realized, its coat catching the moonlight. The animal was clearly exhausted, sides heaving with exertion, tongue laying, but its posture remained vigilant, head raised as it tested the air with its sensitive nose. William tried to speak, to call Phenomal, but his voice emerged as only a dry croak. Still, it was enough. The German Shepherd's head swiveled toward him, intelligent eyes reflecting the moonlight. The dog took a cautious step forward, then another, approaching William with the weariness of a wild creature. "Good dog," William managed to whisper as the animal came within arm's reach. "Where did you come from?" The German Shepherd sniffed him thoroughly, paying particular attention to the red patches in his arms. Then, surprisingly, the dog sat back on its haunches and released a single sharp bark, not at William, but into the darkness behind it. William strained to see what the dog was signaling to. For a moment there was nothing. Then, emerging from the shadows, between two cigarros came a small figure. A child walking unsteadily, one hand clutching a small backpack. The dog barked again, more insistently, and the child changed direction, moving toward them. As the figure drew closer, The moonlight revealed what William had both hoped and feared to see. A young boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with distinctive red patches visible on his exposed neck and arms. Ethan Parker had found him, or more accurately, Ethan's dog had found them both. Ethan Parker sat huddled in the shadow of a large saguaro cactus, trying to make himself as small as possible against the scorching heat. The sun had climbed high overhead, transforming the Sonoran desert into a merciless oven. His small hands trembled as he carefully unscrewed the cap of his water bottle. Already half empty, Robert had left him with just enough supplies to prolong his suffering, not now to survive. He allowed himself only the tiniest sip, barely enough to wet his parched lips before screwing the cap back on with deliberate care, 6 years old and already calculating how long he could last before dehydration claimed him. The irony wasn't lost on him that the very illness that had made him a burden to Robert was now making him even more vulnerable to the desert's killing heat. His arms and neck burned with the familiar red patches, worse now than they'd ever been. The stress and exposure triggering the worst flare-up he'd experienced. Each heartbeat sent pulses of pain through his joints. The doctors back in Phoenix had never been able to explain it, just prescribed medications that cost more than his mother could afford. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered to the empty desert. "I should have known." Something was wrong when Robert said we were going for a drive. The memory of that morning replayed in his mind. His mother kissing him goodbye before heading to her overnight nursing shift. Robert's unusual smile as he suggested they spend some quality time together. Thor's desperate barking as Robert pushed the dog back into the house. Thor had known. Somehow the German Shepherd had sensed the betrayal coming. Ethan closed his eyes, trying not to think about Thor, the loyal dog who slept at the foot of his bed during flare-ups, who somehow always knew when the pain was about to strike, sometimes alerting his mother before Ethan himself felt these symptoms. The thought that he would never see Thor again hurt worse than the red patches burning on his skin. "I'm just holding them back," Ethan whispered, echoing words he'd overheard Robert say to his mother. "The treatments aren't working. We're drowning in debt that night." Hiding at the top of the stairs while his mother and stepfather argued in harsh whispers, Ethan had learned the truth. He was a financial burden, an anchor dragging his mother down. Robert had married a woman with a chronically ill child, and he'd grown to resent them both for it. A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek, instantly evaporating in the desert heat. He hadn't told his mother what he'd heard. She worked double shifts already, came home with dark circles under her eyes, fell asleep while helping with his homework. How? Could head to her burdens by telling her that Robert wanted out? Now Robert had found his solution. No divorce, no messy explanations, just a child who wandered off in the desert, a tragic accident that would garner sympathy rather than suspicion. The sound came so faintly at first that Ethan thought he was hallucinating, the soft padding of paws on sand, a familiar panting that had accompanied him throughout his short life. He raised his head, squinting against the harsh sunlight. Thor. The name escaped his cracked lips in a hoarse whisper. For a moment there was nothing. Then, cresting a small ridge 50 yards away, a familiar silhouette appeared. The pointed ears, the noble profile, the tail now hanging low with exhaustion. Thor stood there, scanning the desert until his gaze locked onto Ethan. "Thor." Ethan's voice broke as heckled out, using precious energy to struggle to his feet. The German Shepherd's reaction was immediate, ears perking up, body tensing, then launching into a full sprint toward his boy. Ethan stumbled forward, his legs weak from hours in the heat, his arms outstretched. They met in a collision offer, tears, and desperate relief. Thor's tongue lapped at Ethan's face, cleaning away salt tracks from dried tears while the boy buried his face in the dog's neck, inhaling the familiar scent of foam. Thor's coat was hot to the touch, his sides heaving with exertion, but his eyes were bright with single-minded purpose. "You found me," Ethan sobbed, his small arms wrapped around Thor's neck. "You actually found me." Thor whined softly, nudging Ethan with his nose as if checking him for injuries. The dog's paws were raw and bleeding from the unforgiving desert terrain, his tongue hanging out as he panted heavily in the heat. "You need water," Ethan realized, reaching for his precious bottle. Without hesitation, he poured some into his cupped hand, offering it to Thor. The German Shepherd laughed at it gratefully, but after only a few sips he pulled back, looking at Ethan as if to say, "Save the rest for yourself." "It's okay, boy," Ethan whispered, stroking Thor's head. "We'll share. We've always shared, right?" The reunion gave Ethan a renewed will to survive. If Thor could track him across miles of desert, then maybe, just maybe, they could find their way home together. He stood up, wincing as his inflamed joints prodded and surveyed their surroundings. Nothing but cacti scrub and rock formations stretching to the horizon in every direction. "Which way, Thor?" he asked, his voice small against the vast emptiness. "Which way is home?" Thor turned in a circle, nose testing fair, then looked back at Ethan with what seemed like uncertainty. The dog had accomplished his primary mission, finding his boy. Getting home was a different challenge altogether. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan and Thor moved slowly from shade to shade, conserving energy and the last of the water. The red patches on Ethan's skin grew more vivid, the pain more intense. Each step became an exercise in will, but the presence of Thor beside him made the impossible seem merely difficult. "Mom's going to be so happy to see us," Ethan said to Thor as they rested beneath an overhanging rock. "She's probably looking for us already. Robert probably told her I wandered off or something." Thor's ears perked up at the name Robert, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Yeah, I know." Ethan sighed, scratching Ben Thor's ears. "You never liked him much either, did you? Even when he pretended to be nice." As the sun began its descent, the heat became marginally more bearable, but Ethan's condition was deteriorating. The water was gone now, the last drop shared between boy and dog an hour earlier. Thirst clawed at his throat, and the pain in his joints made walking increasingly difficult. "I don't know if I can keep going, Thor," he admitted, slumping down beside a barrel cactus. "Everything hurts," Thor wed, nudging Ethan's arm with his nose, then trotted a few paces away, looking back expectantly. "I need to rest just for a minute," Ethan insisted. Thor disappeared behind a rocky outcropping. Ethan closed his eyes just for a moment, the exhaustion overwhelming him. When he opened them again, Thor was standing over him. Something clutched gently in his jaws. The German Shepherd dropped his prize at Ethan's feet, a small desert lizard still alive and squirming. Ethan stared in confusion until understanding dawned. Thor hadn't just been trained as a family pet. He had descended from a long line of working dogs with instincts that ran deeper than commands and tricks. "Water," Ethan whispered, looking at Thelazard with new understanding. Desert survival lessons from a school field trip floated back to him. Some desert creatures could be sources of moisture in emergencies. With trembling hands, Ethan picked up the lizard. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the small creature before doing what was necessary to extract the minimal moisture it contained. The act made him gag, but the few drops of liquid were like nectar to his parched throat. Thor watched it approvingly, then suddenly stiffened, his attention captured by something beyond the rocks. His ears swiveled forward, body tensing in alert posture rather than threat. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, struggling to his feet. Thor barked once sharply, then took off around the outcropping. Ethan followed as quickly as his painful joints allowed, rounding the corner to see Thor standing at attention, looking into the distance. There, perhaps a quarter-mile away, Ethan could make out the shape of a vehicle, some kind of SUV, motionless in the desert. Someone else was out here. "Help!" Ethan tried to shout, but his voice emerged despairingly a croak from his dehydrated throat. Thor barked again, louder this time, as if compensating for Ethan's weakness. Then, without waiting for command, the German Shepherd took off toward the vehicle, his mission clear: find help for his boy. "Thor, wait," Ethan called, hobbling after him with renewed urgency. What if the vehicle belonged to Robert coming back? To check if the job was done? Or worse, what if it was just an abandoned wreck, offering hope only to snatch it away? But Thor's instincts had gotten him this far. Ethan had to trust that the dog knew what he was doing. He pressed forward, ignoring the fire in his joints and the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. As they drew closer, Ethan could see it was indeed a Range Rover, much nicer than anything Robert could afford. And there, slumped against one of the wheels, was a man, unmoving but clearly not dead, as Thor was now circling him cautiously, sniffing with intense interest. The man was older, maybe grandpa age, with silver hair and expensive-looking clothes, now soiled with desert dust. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. But what made Ethan stop in his tracks were the angry red patches visible on the man's forearms, identical to the ones that covered his own skin. Ethan approached the unconscious man cautiously, Thor remaining vigilant at his side. The German Shepherd's hackles weren't raised, a good sign. Thor had always been an excellent judge of character, growing restless around Robert long before the man had shown his true colors. "Mister," Ethan called weakly, his voice barely carrying through the still desert air. "Are you okay?" The man stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering. Thor moved closer, sniffing intently at the red patches on the man's arms. The dog's behavior was peculiar, almost as if he recognized the scent-off condition Ethan had noticed before. How Thor would nuzzle his own patches during flare-ups, as if trying to comfort him. "Water," the man croaked, eyes still closed. "Please," Ethan bit his lip. He had no water to offer. His own bottle was empty, and his throat felt like sandpaper. "I don't have any," he admitted. "Mine's all gone, too." The man's eyes opened then, unfocused at first, then widening as they registered the small boy standing before him. His gaze traveled from Ethan's face to the angry patches on his arms and neck. "My God," he whispered. "You're Ethan Parker." Ethan took a step back, alarm bells ringing in his head. How did the stranger know his name? Was he connected to Robert somehow? Thor sensed his unease, moving protectively between Ethan and the man. "How do you know who?" "I am?" Ethan demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The man struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as his joints protested. "My name is William Harris," he said. I knew your father." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His real father, Michael Parker, had died when Ethan was just 3. His memories were foggy at best, a gentle laugh, the smell of aftershave, strong arms lifting him high. His mother kept photos around the house, but they talked about him less and less after Robert entered their lives. "My dad's dead," Ethan said flatly. William nodded, his expression grave. "I know, and I don't think it was an accident," he gestured weakly toward the Range Rover. "In the glove compartment, there's a photo and my canteen might still have some water." Thor was already investigating the open driver's side door, his nose working overtime. Ethan approached the vehicle hesitantly, reaching in to open the glove compartment. Inside, he found a battered leather flask that sloshed promisingly when he shook it. There was also a manila envelope. Ethan brought the flask back to William, who shook his head. "You first," the man insisted. "Thirst overrode caution." Ethan took a small sip, the lukewarm water of blessing on his parched throat. He then poured a little into his palm for Thor, who lapped it up gratefully before offering the flask. Back to William. The man took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," he said after a small sip. "Now the envelope, please." Ethan retrieved the manila envelope and handed it over. William opened it with unsteady fingers, pulling out a photograph they've handed to Ethan. The boy stared at the image. Two men in lab coats standing side by side in what looked like a medical office. One was clearly his father, younger than in most of the photos at home. The other was a younger version of William. "That was taken 15 years ago," William explained. "Your father was consulting on a case. My case, I have the same condition you have." Ethan's eyes widened, his gaze returning to the red patches on William's arms, identical to his own. In all the doctor's offices, through all tests and specialists, no one had ever shown them another person with the same symptoms. "The doctors don't know what it is," Ethan said. "Some of them do," William replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "They just won't admit it." He took another small sip from the flask. "Your father was beginning to put the pieces together. He reached out to me 3 years ago, said he had evidence about Therigen of our condition. But before we could meet the car accident, Ethan finished, something cold settling in his stomach." William nodded grimly. A perfectly maintained car, a straight road, clear weather, and an experienced driver who somehow veered into a ravine. "Doesn't add up, does it?" Ethan shook his head slowly, trying to process this information. Thor had settled beside him, his warm presence a comfort against the increasingly chilling conversation. "Your father was a good man," William cautioned, "a brilliant doctor who asked too many questions. When he realized his own son was showing symptoms of a condition that shouldn't exist naturally, he became determined to find answers." "Is that why you're here?" Ethan asked, looking for answers. William's gaze dropped. "I was following you and your stepfather," he admitted. "I've been watching your family from a distance, trying to figure out how to approach your mother without scaring her away. Then yesterday, something happened. Robert was visited by two men who didn't look like the friendly sort. This morning, when he took you for a drive, I followed. I lost your trail and then my car broke down." He gestured helplessly at the Range Rover. "I thought I'd die out here. Robert left me," Ethan said quietly. "He drove away and left me to die." William's face hardened. "That son of a," he caught himself glancing at Ethan. "Sorry, but that doesn't sound right. From what me investigators told me, Robert seemed to care for you and your mother." Ethan remembered the arguments, the stress lines around Robert's eyes when medical bills arrived, the growing distance. "He got tired of me being sick," he said simply. "Told Mom I was draining them financially." William was shaking his head before Ethan even finished. "Kid, you think there's more to it than that." He shifted, grimacing in pain. "Those men who visited Robert yesterday, I've seen their type before. Government types who'd like loose ends." Thor suddenly stood alert, ears forward, a low growl building in his chest. Both Ethan and William fell silent, watching the German Shepherd. The dog was staring intently back the way they had come, his posture communicating clear warning. "Someone's coming," William whispered. Ethan nodded, trusting Thor's senses implicitly. "He acts like this when strangers approach our house." William's expression grew urgent. "Listen to me, Ethan. I think Robert was threatened. I think he was given a choice. Get rid of you or something would happen to both you and your mother." "What?" Ethan's voice rose in disbelief. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because of what we have," William said, tapping the red patches on his arm. "Because your father was getting close, tough truth, and now you're walking evidence." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a crumpled envelope. "I found this in my research. It might explain everything." Ethan took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a creased, official-looking document with parts redacted in heavy black marker. The letterhead read, "Department of Defense," and below it, "Project Sunrise, Longitudinal Health Assessment." "What is this?" Ethan asked. "Evidence that what we have isn't natural," William said grimly. "In the late 7 South, the military conducted tests on soldiers, volunteers who thought they were getting routine vaccinations. Your grandfather was one of them, so was mine." Ethan's mind reeled. His grandfather had been in Thermy. He knew that much. There were medals in a case in his mother's closet, but what did that have to do with his condition? The tests altered something in them. William continued. "Nothing happened to them directly, but their children, our parents, carried a genetic anomaly, and then in the next generation us, it manifested as this condition." Thor's growling intensified, and he took a few steps toward whatever threat he sensed, placing himself between it and the humans. "We need to move," William urged, attempting to stand, but faltering. "If those are the same men who visited Robert, why would Robert do it?" Ethan interrupted, still stuck on the revelation. "Even if he was threatened, how could he leave me here?" William's eyes softened with unexpected impatience. "Sometimes when people are truly terrified, they convince themselves they're choosing the lesser evil. Maybe he thought leaving you here gave you a chance, however small. Maybe he planned to send help anonymously once he was in the clear." Ethan remembered Robert's strange behavior that morning, the way he'd avoided eye contact, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, the way his voice had cracked when he'd said goodbye. Not the actions of someone callously abandoning a child, but of someone breaking under pressure. "There's more," William said, pulling another photo from the envelope. This was taken 2 days ago. The image showed Robert leaving a bank, his expression strained. In the background, partially obscured but unmistakable, was a black sedan with 2 men watching him. "He emptied your college fund," William explained. $20,000, but the money never made it to your home. I think he was setting up a new identity for your mother and you, planning to disappear after staging your tragic accident in the desert." Thor barked suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound, and turned back to them with clear agitation. Whatever he sensed was getting closer. Ethan's mind was whirling. If what William said was true, then Robert wasn't a monster. He was a victim too. "We have to get out of here," he said, the shock giving way to a clarity beyond his ears. "I can't walk far," William admitted, gesturing to his inflamed joints. "And the Range Rover is dead." Thor barked again, more insistently, moving to William's side and nudging him forcefully as if trying to help him stand. "I think he wants us to try the car again," Ethan said, interpreting Thor's behavior with the ease of long familiarity. William looked doubtful, but allowed Ethan and Thor to help him to his feet. "The battery's dead. I tried earlier. My dad used to say, sometimes cars just need to cool down in this heat," Ethan offered, remembering one of the few practical lessons his father had given him before dying. They stumbled to the Range Rover together, William leaning heavily on Ethan. Despite the boy's small size, Thor circled them protectively, his attention divided between helping them and monitoring the unseen threat he detected. William collapsed into the driver's seat with a groan of pain. "Worth a try, I suppose," he muttered, turning the key. To everyone's surprise, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. "The alternator must have cooled enough," William said, his voice lifting with hope. "Quick, get in." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He yanked open the passenger door, and Thor leapt in ahead of him, taking up position in the footwell rather than on the seat. Ethan climbed in after him, pulling the door shut just as William engaged the transmission. The Range Rover lurched forward, its tires spinning briefly in the loose desert soil before finding purchase. Through the side mirror, Ethan caught a glimpse of what had alarmed Thor, a dust cloud in the distance moving fast. A vehicle approaching. Along the same desert track Robert had used. "Someone's following us," he reported, fear tightening his chest. William nodded grimly, focusing on navigating the rough terrain. "Not for long. I know these back roads better than most. Used to do a lot of research out here." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed Ethan a worn leather wallet. "There's a picture in there I think you shall see." With trembling fingers, Ethan opened the wallet. Behind a plastic window was a photo that made his breath catch. His father, Michael, holding a baby that could only be FN, with William standing beside them, smiling proudly like an uncle or godfather. "Your father and I weren't just colleagues," William said quietly, keeping his eyes on the makeshift road ahead. "We were friends. Good friends. I'm your godfather, Ethan, and I made a promise to your father that if anything ever happened to him, I'd look after you and your mother. Then where have you been?" Ethan couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I've been watching from a distance, trying to make sure you were safe without interfering when your mother remarried, I thought. I thought you both deserved a fresh start without painful reminders." His voice dropped. "I was wrong. I should have kept a closer eye on things. Maybe none of this would have happened." Thor wed softly, resting his head on Ethan's knee as if sensing the emotional turmoil within the vehicle. "So, what now?" Ethan asked, watching the dust cloud behind them grow smaller as William navigated the Range Rover through a series of turns that took them deeper into the desert rather than toward civilization. "Now," William said with determination, "we find your mother, make sure she's safe, and then I make good on my promise to your father. We expose the truth about Project Sunrise and find a treatment for our condition." He gave Ethan a quick sidelong glance. "Your father was close to a breakthrough and he died. He believed the key might be in your blood." "My blood?" "Third-generation cases like yours show signs that the body is developing natural defenses against the condition. Your father theorized that if we could isolate those antibodies, we might develop a treatment not just for us but for others affected by the project." Thor's ears suddenly perked up, his attention fixing on something ahead. William slowed the Range Rover, squinting through the dusty windshield. "What is it?" Ethan asked. William's expression shifted from concern to grim satisfaction. "Looks like Robert left us a clue after all." There, spray painted on a large boulder beside the crude desert track, was a roughly drawn arrow pointing east, and below it 2 letters EP. Ethan Parker's initials. "Your stepfather," William said softly, "was leaving a trail for rescuers to follow. He didn't abandon you completely, Ethan. He was trying in his own flawed way to give you a chance." Thor's body tensed suddenly, his ears swiveling like redardishes as a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. The German Shepherd scrambled to the rear window of the Range Rover, paws on the glass, his attention fixed on something behind them. "They're still following," William muttered, glancing in the rearview mirror at the distant dust cloud, and gaining. He pressed harder on the accelerator, but the Range Rover was already struggling over the uneven desert terrain, its expensive suspension not designed for this kind of punishment. Ethan twisted in his seat, following Thor's gaze. The dust cloud had indeed grown larger, suggesting their pursuers had vehicles better suited to off-road conditions. His heart hammered against his ribs as the red patches on his skin throbbed in time with his pulse. The stress was making his condition worse. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice small against Thingein's strain, and Thor's continued growling. William's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Government cleanup crew, if..." I had to guess. The kind that makes problems disappear. He shot Ethan a quick glance. But they won't get to you, I promise. The Range Rover crested Asmal Rise, its undercarriage scraping painfully against rock. As they descended the other side, William suddenly jerked the wheel hard to the right, taking them behind a large outcropping that momentarily hid them from view of their pursuers. Quick thinking, Ethan said, impressed despite their dire situation. Your father's influence, William replied with a grim smile. He always said, when you can't outrun trouble, outsmart it. They continued along the shadow of the rocky ridge, the Range Rover's black paint offering some camouflage against the dark stone. Thor had settled slightly, though his ears remained alert, swiving to track sounds that human ears couldn't detect. Will they find us? Ethan asked, watching the rocks blur past his window. Eventually, William admitted, but we just need enough time to reach the highway. There's a ranger station about 30 miles east. If we can get there, we'll have witnesses. Protection. A sudden mechanical groan from beneath the hood sent a shudder through the entire vehicle. William cursed under his breath, easing off the accelerator as a warning light flashed on the dashboard. Overheating, he explained tersely. This desert's hell on engines. They limped headfirst another half-mile before white steam began billowing from under the hood, forcing William to bring the Range Rover to a stop in the shadow of a massive saguaro cactus. End of Therode, he sighed, switching off the engine. The sudden silence was oppressive, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and Thor's low whine. Ethan fought back tears of frustration, so close to escape, only to be stranded. Again, the red patches on his skin seemed to burn hotter, as if sensing his distress. What do we do now? William was already rummaging in the back of the vehicle. We go on foot, he said, pulling out a canvas bag. There's an old mining trail about 2 miles east. It'll lead us to a service road that connects to the highway. He handed Ethan a baseball cap. Put this on. Keep the sun off your face. Ethan took the cap. A Boston Red Sox logo faded from years of wear and pulled it on. It was far too big, slipping down over his eyes until he adjusted the strap at the back. What about water? William produced 2 bottles from a small cooler hidden under the back seat. Emergency stash. Not much, but it'll have to do. He unscrewed one and offered it to Ethan, small sips. Make it last. Ethan took a careful sip, then poured a little into his cupped palm for Thor, who lapped it up gratefully. The dog's tongue was dry and rough against his skin, a reminder of how much Thor had already endured to find him. He's an extraordinary animal, William observed, watching the interaction with something like wonder in his eyes. To track you across miles of desert like that, it's almost unbelievable. Thor's special, Ethan said simply, stroking the dog's head. Dad always said he picked Thor because he could sense things other dogs couldn't. William's expression sharpened with interest. Your father chose him specifically? Ethan nodded. From a special breeding program. Dad said Thor's bloodline was used for search and rescue, medical detection, that kind of thing. A memory surfaced. His father kneeling beside him, a hand on Thor's head, saying words Ethan hadn't understood at the time. He'll know, son. When it happens, he'll know. William seemed to be connecting jigsaw dots in his mind. Your father was preparing, he murmured almost to himself. Even then, he was setting up protection for you. Before Ethan could ask what he meant, Thor's ears shot up, his body going rigid with alert tension. The German shepherd's head turned east, away from the direction their pursuers had been coming from, and he let out a single sharp bark. What? Is it boy? Ethan asked, instantly attentive to Thor's signals. William was already scanning the horizon, shielding his eyes against their harsh sunlight. Someone else is out there, he said. his voice tight with renewed tension. Thor barked again, but this time the sound was different. Not a warning, but almost welcoming. The German Shepherd began to pace anxiously, looking from Ethan to the eastern horizon and back again, as if trying to communicate something of vital importance. "I don't think he's sensing danger," Ethan said, interpreting Thor's behavior with the confidence of long familiarity. "He acts like this when Mom comes home from work." Hope flickered across William's pain-lined face. "Is it?"